Hi, this is Mike Manrod, co-founder and instructor with the Threat Intelligence Support Unit. And I'm here to bring you an exam prep review for the TSU exam. Now, you might be watching this video and wonder, what's TSU? Why am I seeing this video? Well, TSU is the Threat Intelligence Support Unit, a community co-founded with support from both Grand Canyon University and ACTRA, or the Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance. And it is a community that both does threat and adversary and vulnerability research. And that community has put together a free training and free certification for people who take the training. So we will be doing a review session for those in the course. However, it may be valuable for you even if you are not attending the free TSU training. Again, TSU is Threat Intelligence Support Unit. But to do threat intelligence, you need some broad security knowledge that applies to a lot of topics besides just cyber threat intelligence. So we really intend for this to be an on-ramp to get people started on their cyber journey. Perhaps not the only on-ramp. We're advocates for having lots of good on-ramps, but we want this to be one of them. And the group that is running right now, studying for their exam, is the 6th cohort of TSU. So we've had 6 waves. In the fall, we will do the 7th. So we're going to look at attacker objectives, general attack and defense flows. We're going to look at the Lockheed kill chain. We're going to take a look at cyber threat intelligence and the basics of SOC and IR. We're going to take a look at MITRE ATT&CK, CIS 18 for how to defend against the things we see in MITRE ATT&CK or in a kill chain. We're going to talk a little bit about threats and risk management, and then we're going to do a summary of SOC and IR and the basics of that. There's even a few topics not on the agenda, but if you're interested in learning basics about cyber, this video is definitely for you. And if you are in the process of studying for the TSU exam, then this video is definitely made for you. So I think the first thing we have to understand before we look at cyber security is attacker objectives. Like, what does the attacker want to accomplish? What is their goal when they attack? Why do that? Well, let's first start with a few different types of adversaries. You have nation-state adversaries, which is like a country. A foreign country wants to attack a company or government entity or nonprofit or whatever it may be. Maybe they're after secrets and intellectual property. That's what that acronym IP means. It can either be an address on the internet, or IP can also mean intellectual property. It could be to disrupt and to distract. It could be disinformation, or as I like to call it, mental malware. That MDM acronym was coined by Homeland Security, and it stands for misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. Right? These are common playbooks of nation states. In addition, nation states might use cyber to advance an actual military agenda. You'll notice the org's called TSU. I'm a tea lover, so I'm going to be drinking a lot of tea while we chat today. Cybercrime, ransomware, extortion, fraud, stealing data and selling it, stealing data and using it for other types of fraud or crime, very common. Hacktivists. These are people who have some sort of political agenda or ideology that are not a nation state. So they're stealing data, they're doxing, perhaps, which is where you steal data that's supposed to be private and release it, but not for profit, but just to do harm. Like sometimes hacktivists will release the home address of a public figure or the contents of their inbox or some sort of destructive intellectual property that causes them harm. There's distributed denial of service attacks, which is where somebody just uses a lot of computing resources, usually ill-gained, to take down a website, a system, or an infrastructure, or some sort of resource to do a company harm that they disagree with. There's data destruction and sabotage, And then lastly, there's insider threats. When I got started in cyber, it was a while ago, you'd hear people talk at practically every conference saying, hey, the insider's your biggest weak. Look out for the insider threat. I always sort of, had an eye roll moment with that because let's face it, the top three, and especially the top two categories like nation state and cybercrime are way more common than insider threat or even insider threat and hacktivist. However, if you have one insider threat once every so often, it will cause a lot of headaches. So don't discount insider threat. It is not super common, but it's very impactful and significant when it does occur. We all are familiar with the Edward Snowden case and other similar cases where you could only have one insider threat a decade, but it could still be your most impactful threat of that decade. Then there's revenge, grudge, like see hacktivist, like from an insider. Sometimes you have companies who just don't treat their employees well. Sometimes there's opportunists, like see cybercrime. Of course, all of these things are not exhaustive. This is to provide a basic exam review or rapid overview. So the basics of attack and defense. I really believe there's two types of attacks. And when giving this, delivering some of these slides in person, I make the audience gasp. But I think we can boil things down to a simple level. And for initial access, for that very beginning of a bad day that starts with intrusion from a threat actor, an adversary, it starts with either an attack that involved a person or an attack that did not involve a person. So we can come up with a simplified flow, right? The attacker selected an initial attack vector. If they were going after users, or this can be called like attacking people, they're going after email or messaging apps. It could be something malicious in Teams or Discord or your chat for your favorite social media platform. It could be a website users go to. Now, sometimes a vulnerable website will be compromised and serve up malware. This happens quite a bit. But also, it can happen where a threat actor or adversary will take out a malicious ad. Like, say they created a piece of malware that disguised within an application like Putty, or Putty.exe. It's just a computer program people use to talk to computers. And then they take out an ad for Putty, and then you download a copy of Putty that actually works, but there's a Trojan, a rootkit, a backdoor. More on that later. There's something malicious there, and now the attacker might get control of your machine. Now, it could be that it's a working version of, say, Putty.exe, which is an advanced attack, involving like sideloading and basically shell code and quite a bit going on there. Or it could be a very, very more basic attack where it's a commodity piece of malware just renamed Putty.exe and served up from an ad. And, a smart user would be like, uh-oh, something's going on. But a less savvy user might be like, this Putty was no good. I'll download another one. And then social engineering, popularized by the late and great Kevin Mitnick, which is picking up the phone and calling somebody. Hey, Ted, this is Mike from the support desk. Yeah. So look, we're doing upgrades on all the systems in your building, and for whatever reason, I couldn't get to yours. Your floor was locked when I came in. Yours was the last system left, and I'm going to get in trouble. Can I just get you, I'm going to give you something to type into your browser. Can I get you to go to a website, download a file, and just install it, and that'll be your update? Okay, great, thank you. Right, social engineering could involve somebody picking up the phone, but it could also just involve somebody, putting social or human intelligence into how they create a phishing email, how they create a fraud campaign, how they create a landing page. Like, hey, I got an email. It looked like the real O365 or Salesforce or ticketing app or whatever. And I click the link. It behaves how I expect. Then maybe there's an intercept of my credentials, and it's really convincing, right? So social engineering can even be used to get around multi-factor. Really common, easy one attackers use is called the MFA push attack, where like they guess a password and then they just try it over and over and over again. So some people are like, well, hey, I've covered the user route, right? Like I have good security products protecting email and messaging. I've got web firewalls, secure web gateways. We do lots of social engineering training. And besides, my company is kind of small, so I don't have to worry that much. I'm good. Well, adversaries frequently will also go after things that don't involve people. So imagine like you have a software application or a website facing the internet. So the other way is a user visits a bad website that compromises that user. But the other direction is you may have a perfectly good website facing the internet, but maybe it's just not quite good enough, right? Maybe there's a software flaw that allows an attacker to get their code to run on your system. So that's often what we call remote code or remote command execution. So that doesn't require any user interaction. And there's flaws called escape to host that we'll talk about later, where, hey, somebody gets out of like an application sandbox. That could apply in either space, involving users or not. And then they get out to where they can do more damage. There's servers, there's services, there's containers, there's cloud workflows. All of them run software. All of them tend to host applications and websites or other services. Any of those layers could be flawed. And then lastly, there's the identity or account layer. Don't let your password be password, right? Make sure that you're picking, strong passwords and that they're different for each thing. And for administrative things, there should be rotation mechanisms, or there should be strong standards for like service-based or machine account passwords or admin passwords. So often an attacker will get in without involving a user, but they just guess a weak password, or default credentials are the worst. Hey, this thing ships from the factory and the password is root and Calvin or admin, and nobody thought to change it. Very, very common problem. So when we're mapping out attack surface or doing attack surface mapping, we do this by actually looking at, open sourced intelligence, aka OSINT, will tell us about the attack surface we have. That's what attackers use to research us, but we can use it to research ourselves. But you have open source intelligence, or basically Google foo, if you will, to pull an old term, to learn about users and the types of risks they represent. And then you have persons of interest, right? Maybe really high profile people you got to protect a little better. And then you have systems of interest. There's sites, and we'll look at how to do recon to learn about systems and people of interest briefly later on. So when you're looking at attacks that don't involve people, you're looking at systems and infrastructure of interest, and it's OSINT, or open source intelligence, involving infrastructure. So if we have an attack involving user interaction, it basically boils down to a few things. It's like usually either a bad link, a bad attachment, a watering hole attack, meaning something that a legit website that serves up malware. We already touched on insider threat. And then, of course, there's text-based attacks, like an email or a text message that just tells somebody to do something bad. Like a common one is called toad, or telephone-oriented attack delivery. And in toad attacks, they don't like jump over each other. I mean, maybe they do. But their main thing is, hey, bad thing, bad thing, bad thing, lies, 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 and a lure that says, call this number. And then they have somebody there ready for fraud or whatever they're after. You end up with this weird nesting of links can be to attachments. Attachments can have links, but those things crisscross and intersect until you just boil it down to you either have a bad file, malware, or you have a bad link, a bad site intercepting credentials, or it could be malware exploiting a browser, similar to the watering hole attack. But basically, these things converge on a limited set of scenarios we can analyze. And we can look at how this works layer by layer. hey, if they exploit an application, there's some frameworks that tell us how to deal with web application security. OWASP Top 10, Open Web Application Security Project. You've got web application firewalls on the defensive side. And then you've got, basically application security as a discipline, how to scan, how to fix, how to securely develop things. There's a really, really great author and podcaster in this space known as She Hacks Purple. Tanya Janka, she writes some great books in this space. Then if we kind of bundle together, like, hey, you're attacking an account or you're exploiting a running service, and sometimes you're attacking an account using an exploitable running service. But if you boil it down, like the things that help us understand this are MITRE ATT&CK, and then we can resolve it through good identity access management, what's called zero trust network architecture or zero trust architecture, ZTA or ZTNA for short. Basically, it's just how to build things correctly so that there's not excessive trust built into the process. And then there's just basic host hardening, host firewalling, patching, doing the basics right. And then there's exploiting the actual host OS or maybe lower level installed software. Again, there's patching, there's antivirus, there's a product called EDR or endpoint detection and response. And again, MITRE ATT&CK's huge. High level attackers want to get in so they can move laterally, gain privileged access and expand reach, and then circle through those things until they have enough access and enough reach to be able to do what they want. So I remember, earlier in my cyber career, Target was breached. And right around the time, I think inspired by that, shortly thereafter, Lockheed Martin put together a kill chain, right? And, in the military, we love kill chains. There's kill chains on all sorts of things. The geniuses at Lockheed at that time were like, all right, we're going to put together a cyber kill chain so that people can just understand the process flow. Like, how do we deal with this? Because they looked at the Target breach and it looked predictable. Like, maybe if something would have happened different a couple of spots along that line, it would have gone better. So they broke it down to these stages of like recon, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation of the actual malware, command and control, action on objectives. And this isn't bad. It helped a lot. And for years, it added a lot of clarity to the process. But we found, still useful, still good to teach beginners about. I still sometimes think of this kill chain when it applies to something. But ultimately, MITRE ATT&CK here became the de facto standard because it, as you can see, and we're going to go into it, it just has way more granularity. Once you understand an attack flow, and we'll touch on this now because we're not going to come back to it. Basically, you've got a series of tools, right? Like there's lots of free testing tools and they're exhaustive. There's entire GitHub projects with like hundreds of entries just to track the good free tools out there. But there's stuff like Atomic Red Team, Sliver is a C2 framework. Atomic Red Team, the idea is it's atomic, it's little modules or pieces. Sliver is a C2 framework created by folks at Bishop Fox. Another one not on the slide that was released at DEF CON Demo Labs a few years ago was called Hard Hat. Auto, Pawn Key, and Bypass It are C2 frameworks and testing frameworks built by members of this TSU community, both people who've graduated TSU and who teach at TSU and some other folks in the community too. Lots of contribution, and we love that. Metasploit by H.D. Moore is one of the big ones. There's obviously Mimikatz, that is a tremendous security research project. There's Zap and Burp Suite are both free, but Burp Suite is also in our paid category because they have both. There's Brute Ratel and Cobalt Strike are commercial C2 frameworks. So like Auto, Pawn Key, and Bypass It are free, and so is Sliver, so is Hard Hat, so is Atomic Red Team. These are things that you can just use, Metasploit. But for Brute Ratel, Burp Suite, Cobalt Strike, Nessus, they all have both paid and unpaid offerings. Which, hey, if you're going to sell something, that's not a bad model. Actually, I don't think Cobalt Strike and Brute Ratel have unpaid. Sorry, they're paid only. But some of those frameworks have paid and unpaid. Nessus is a security scanner. There's several others. And then there's these continuous security monitoring products like Ionix, RiskSense, Security Scorecard. Again, many more in all these categories. But this is just to give you familiarity with a few common tools that may come up in a job interview or something like that. If somebody throws out one of these tools and you're like, wait a minute, Cobalt Strike, is that like the new PlayStation game that came out? Your chances of getting the job are going down a bit. So these are all things you want to Google, ChatGPT, learn a little bit about on your own time. Not all of them will be on the test, but you need to know that these things exist and kind of what space they fit in. So cyber threat intelligence, or CTI, and collective defense are topics near and dear to my heart because TSU, or the Threat Intelligence Support Unit, and the supporting organization ACTRA, or the Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance, are both threat intelligence sharing communities. Now, threat intelligence varies, right? Like to some people, threat intelligence is just like hash values and IP addresses. Like, hey, what files are bad? What internet places are bad? To me, it's way different than that, though. Like, there's so much more. There's knowing the tools, the tactics, the approaches, the methodologies. And there's pure gold in working together as a community to understand how adversaries are doing what they're doing, and then how we can test for the same scenarios and understand how well we can defend, even skate to where the hockey puck is going to be, not to where it is, through anticipating and understanding trends. Adversaries share information. Defense is difficult, especially if you do it alone. So let's collaborate, share, and elevate the community. A common cliche, another cliche that used to make me gag as I was growing up in cyber back in the day is like, the adversaries only need to get it right once, whereas defenders have to get it right every time. That is so untrue. Adversaries, as we saw in the kill chain, and we'll see more in the MITRE ATT&CK, except for rare conditions, adversaries need to get like stage after stage right, many stages correct, while defenders can maybe even just disrupt one step and make a difference. So the entire point of a kill chain or MITRE ATT&CK is to map out the flow with the controls and toll gates where attacks can be disrupted. We are going to fail in security, and we're going to fail a lot. But if you fail at stage 2 of a kill chain and stop it at stage 3, maybe you're still okay, right? And maybe if you at least detect it, you can respond to the problem, limit the blast radius is a frequent term, know the flows, know attack flows in general, know how they relate to the exact environment you're defending. For collective defense, as adversaries develop new tactics for intrusion, defense evasion, lateral movement, we raise attackers' costs and reduce their effectiveness when we share information. If I have a problem and I share it with everybody in ACTRA, TSU, InfraGard, maybe reverse engineer with our team what they did and then share that at a conference, and shout out to Christian, Ezra, Cameron, Jim, so many people on our team who are so good at this, and many people in the TSU community who do a lot of this as well, in the ACTRA community. Overall, if we defend together, we defend better. So there's types of information sharing, and I have to say this is like my favorite AI-generated image ever. It is so cute. I don't think the sharing of two dogs in a tug-of-war toy would look quite that calm, but I love the notion. So specific indicators of an attack or indicators of compromise. This is very tactical. This is like what IP address, like basically like a street address on the internet is it coming from? What domain? Like what's the web address of the bad thing? What file hashes? A file hash is simply like a signature that maps exactly to an exact file. So like if I type up a Word doc and just throw random letters, the file hash for it won't match anything else on the internet unless somebody else typed those random characters. File hashes are cool because it's called a fixed message digest, meaning they can describe a very short file, like if I typed hello world into a doc and saved it, or a very, very, very long file, such as if I were to, say, put as much of the Library of Congress as I could fit in one file without crashing my computer. Like, let's just say it's all of it. I don't know if it is or not. That would, by a modern hashing algorithm that's not broken yet, be able to have a unique hash. And the hash of the Word doc or the text file that says hello world would be exactly the same length as the really, really, really long file. So, strategic and tactical, what are adversaries doing and how? What are their objectives and approaches? What are the specific tactics that they're using? Layering in the how. So, for example, a lot of our work with auto pawn key and bypass it were because an ACTRA member org, there's some anonymity there, had an attack, provided a malware sample to TSU. Ezra reverse engineered that malware sample within TSU. And then he had some really interesting observations that led us to test further and to build out multiple exploit frameworks based upon the lessons. So there's a web of interconnected communities. Locally here we have the Arizona Technology Council, we have ACTRA, or the Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance, we have TSU, we have InfraGard, we have various ISACs and ISOs, those are information sharing organizations. And then there's vendor augmented sharing, right? Like if you buy a firewall or an email security gateway or an antivirus from a particular vendor, they roll up the intelligence from all their customers into like one intelligence center, and they make signatures and they push out intelligence to everybody. So again, you'll hear me really big on free and open source and the community, but vendors are important and vendors help us with security too. So we need both community things and we need vendor things. They're all good. Okay, they're not all good, but some are good from each category. So it's all about people, processes, and technology. No matter what you're doing in IT and information technology, it's all about bringing these things together. If you have, a good process, but poorly trained people or disgruntled people carrying out that process, it's not going to go that well. If you have the right people and processes, but they're using flawed technical products that are beyond repair, they're going to fail unless the people are so good that they can replace or band-aid those products. That does happen sometimes. And let's face it, you can take smart people and great technology and a flawed process will fail every time. So this is via Christian Talon, via Threat Connect. Christian is our resident expert in many things, but one of them being Threat Connect. And Christian, Ezra, Megan, several other people, co-creators of TSU, many, many others contributing as well, loves to walk through this analogy, right? And it's from the perspective of the victim, the Death Star. And again, special thanks to Threat Connect, who is also one of the enablers and supporters of our ACTRA information sharing for this, putting together this wonderful analogy of basically doing basically a threat breakdown. So, adversary, Luke Skywalker from Tatooine, like we have his background. He's known as Jedi Panda, and other names. Infrastructure, you've got the Yavin 4 Rebel base. That's like your C2 or your command and control. You have the fighter carrier. You have the X-Wing. And then, of course, let's not forget there's R2-D2. But let's keep it real. Luke was just an accessory. It was really R2-D2 that made it all happen anyway. The capabilities that Luke and this fighter had were like they had torpedoes, he used the Force, he had his father's lightsaber, he had an uncivilized weapon of a blaster, and then, of course, the poor, sad victim. The asset was the Death Star. It was this poor Emperor Palpatine just trying to bring order to the galaxy. And then, of course, the organization was the Empire. The socio-political access, motive was ideological, revenge. Intent was political upheaval, disrupting this world, this galactic empire that was supposed to finally bring peace to the galaxy. And then there's the technical aspect of the actual, TTPs, the tools, techniques, and practices like precision targeting, force-controlled flight, and force communication. So with malware actors, nation states, cybercrime gangs, we can use this methodology, and if we understand the adversary, the infrastructure they're using, the capabilities they have, why they're doing it, how they're doing it, and who they're targeting, we understand a lot. It's a very organized and fun way to put things together. One important thing to note within any intelligence sharing capacity is you need to share safely. So don't take hey, here's this bad piece of malware and just send it out to everybody. I will say sometimes skilled malware researchers will be careless doing that amongst each other with their own payloads. I will say that's very different if you're creating it from scratch than if you're analyzing. If you're analyzing, respect this stuff. It's like that snake. It's dangerous. So defang links, and I'm sorry, snake, got to defang you. But you can replace the T's in HTTPS with HXXPS. You can replace the dot with all the dots with bracket, DOT bracket. And then everybody knows how to, when they're in their analysis virtual machine or they're going to put it into an intelligence platform, everybody knows how to get this back to a workable link to test. But this prevents damage and problems and unintended chaos. So it is safe to send lists of IP addresses. I've seen this debated. File hashes and IP addresses you do not have to defang. You can just share them. But links and live active links and malware you do need to be careful with. The universal standard for sharing malware, it's always in a password protected zip, and the password is always infected or malware. Now, often if you're emailing this to somebody, you're going to have to go tell them, hey, I just sent you something malicious. You're going to have to check your spam gateway because most of us have our systems set up to block password protected zips if they can't be decrypted. So these are the safe practices. Oh, one caveat of sharing IP addresses is if you put https:// an IP address, that's not safe. That would need to be defanged because then you could click it by accident and go to that IP. So traffic light protocol, aka TLP. This is very important. You'll hear this a lot in the intelligence community. Also even just used for water cooler gossip. Be like, hey, TLP, red, I hear this is happening. That just automatically in security circles means don't tell anybody. So this is about threat intelligence, but if somebody comes up to you, hey, TLP red, I'm going to propose tomorrow, that means don't go tweet that person's proposing tomorrow or start a rumor, right? But in intelligence, red means the strictest. It's just within the need to know tight-knit group, and that group could be defined differently in different contexts. But TLP red means don't share it with anybody without explicit permission, basically. Amber strict, both ambers mean, hey, you can share it within your own org. Strict means literally within your own org. You could share it within Actra, but you can't share it with your cube mate next to you who works on your same security team but isn't Actra. You're like, what have you been doing the past 3 days? Sorry, dude. Sorry, can't tell you. Then amber means you can share it within your own org and strategic partners, right? So you cannot share it openly, but you can share it within controlled groups, and it can be multiple controlled groups. Green means you can share it basically with anybody. It's public information, but clear denotes another level of public. Okay, clear just means you can literally go tweet it. So green might mean I can go to an invite-only security conference and share it. I can share it with anybody I want, but I still might show some discretion. Like, I'm not going to email up the threat actor, even with TLP green, and like, hey, did you know we know this about you? But clear, literally, you can go tweet it without concern. So the next thing we're going to get into is a framework I love called MITRE ATT&CK. And this is an old screenshot, and it cuts off, and it's been changed a zillion times since I took it, but this is the URL, attack.mitre.org. Each of these things you can click in. It is a wonderful resource. As you learn this, you can also go play. Black Hill Security has a card game they've made called Backdoors and Breaches out of this. And you can play the card game. You can buy those online from them, but they also let you play for free online. The GCU Cyber Center of Excellence has several decks of cards. I have several decks of cards. If you can find me, I can give you one. But basically, you can also just learn it by clicking through these things and taking notes and begin to imagine like the know your flow. Like, okay, an attacker learns about you. They develop resources. All right, of all these different initial access flows, what are the ways of execution that are likely to pair with it? How, like, go through and role play your way all the way through these as it relates to your organization and environment. So the first stage, as you can see, is called recon. I always like have the song Getting to Know You going through my head when I talk about recon, but it's short for reconnaissance. It's a military term to scope out the battle space, and it's essential for mounting an effective attack. Reconning yourself and your enemies is also important for defense, right? So recon is absolutely key. Adversaries and penetration testers need to understand your environment so they can devise the right attack that makes sense for what they want to do as an adversary. So we have to know ourselves, so we apply recon to ourselves the same way adversaries would, although sometimes we have more efficient tools for it because we have the benefit of inside knowledge. So you have to understand what your attackers want to compromise, what your business wants to defend, and put that together into a flow. So I like to think of recon into a few different ways, like scanning, searching, phishing, and poaching, right? So active scanning is scanning IP ranges, scanning for vulnerabilities, scanning for word lists, like fingerprinting, what frameworks or web frameworks exist in a website. Phishing for information. That's where maybe you socially engineer or call or eavesdrop or hang out in the cafeteria and listen in to pick up key information that's used for part of your attack. Pen testers will do sometimes things that real adversaries will do less often. A cyber criminal, let's face it, for some cybercrime gang in Russia or North Korea, is not going to hang out in your cafeteria to recon you. They're probably not usually going to call. But they will do a lot of recon using the tools available to them. Passive searching. This started with, the original Google dorking back in the day. There's social media, there's search engines, there's code repositories, and there's even specialized search engines for finding vulnerable infrastructure, stuff like Shodan.io. You can also search open technical databases like DNS, Whois, there's scan databases. But my favorite, recent trend, not because I like it, but because I'm terrified by it, is poaching. Searching for closed sources, there's obviously dark web, there's selling of sensitive information that could be recon. Constantly there's credential dumps being sold where you can go on the dark web and say, hey, I want to buy creds for companies in this category, and they'll sell you usernames, passwords, hashes, whatever you need from previous data breaches, right? And then purchasing access is a disturbing but almost funny trend, which is there's an adversary known as Lapsus that just pulled off some really, really horrendously large data breaches by literally just having an open Telegram where they'd be like, hey, who will sell us access to Microsoft? We'll pay cash or Bitcoin, like that kind of vibe. Probably wouldn't pay cash, but like probably Monero or something. But they're like, hey, we'll pay X amount to you if you just give us your username, password, and VPN us in whenever we want. And A, I don't think people usually even get the cash from that. B, that kind of thing is super easy for law enforcement to figure out, in my opinion. So that's a fast track, not to fast cash, a fast track to fast, to sell block one. But some recon tools, and these will be on the test, hint, hint, hint. Google or your favorite large language model, ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini. These things are all great for recon. They're also all great for putting together social engineering pretexts. They're great for a lot of things, helping you research. There's dig, curl, NSLOOKUP, all useful commands. Recon NG is a tool. Maltego, Spiderfoot. These are all, the bottom three are all robust frameworks. And then there's also David Kennedy's social engineering toolkit, which for some reason still actually works. Last time I tested it, getting phishing emails by pretty mature email security gateways. So that's always been a mystery to me. Maybe he put some sort of magic in that. I'll have to tag him in this later. So resource development. I'm a huge fan of the Nut Job and the Nut Job 2 movies. They're so funny, but this squirrel did a good job of resource development. But it's the basic precondition for launching an attack. Anybody who's ever done like a phishing test of their own company, or who's done a pen test where you're sending phishing messages and malware, and you have landing pages and C2 frameworks, and all that stuff takes work to set up. Well, as testers, we're only doing it for like one org at a time. Adversaries have a unique challenge in that they're probably trying to go after all sorts of things. They're a criminal enterprise or a nation state. So frequently, resource development is an entire kill chain or an entire MITRE attack just within this one box. Because often what there will be one adversary who cultivates botnets or cultivates access or fake credentials or resources. And they'll build rentable resources or purchasable resources on the dark web and sell them on criminal underground networks. And then these resources will be rented, bought, or used. So again, there's micro iterations of attack, but hey, if you need email domains to send bad emails, if you need compromised accounts to use, if you need IP addresses or infrastructure or servers to host the C2 for your malware, all these things have to either be built, bought, or hacked. So this is useful from a defender's perspective, because if we do a really good job of sharing our knowledge of what resources adversaries have and burning those resources as fast as possible, it raises the cost and lowers the profitability for attackers, right? So every time we share IP addresses or URLs within a threat community, we actually help with all this. So initial access. This is like one of the most important ones, so we'll spend extra time. And also, my throat's been getting dry. This is a long time to talk after a whole day of meetings, so bear with me. I'll be drinking a lot. I lined up like so many teas and soda waters, it's not even funny. I mean, actually, it is kind of funny. I think I'm going to Comic-Con this year as this incantation of Hamburglar. I actually submitted to Phoenix Fan Fusion some really cool themes. One involving Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Another theme involving like Wicked and Wizard of Oz. Sadly, both of those were deemed boring and declined. It's okay, I get it. They did it other years. I'm late to the party. So now that I'm not locked into a theme, I think I should go to Phoenix Fan Fusion as Hamburglar. Maybe it'll be a vegan patty and gluten-free bun. Like, that remains to be seen. But what's the goal of this phase? This is where it all happens. If you're an attacker, this is where the magic happens. If you're a pen tester, you can get this. Everything falls out of it. As a defender, if you can stop them from getting this, you're in good shape. The reality is, from a defender perspective, attackers are constantly going to get footholds and initial access. So let's face it, this is kind of like the other team in the Super Bowl having the ball. You got to have a good defense because the other team is going to have the ball sometimes. So attacking internet-facing systems, usually this is spread out over many weeks, so I'm going to move through this faster because we literally just talked about it like 20 minutes ago. But essentially, this is attacking internet-facing systems, services, and accounts, attacking users via phishing or malware, social engineering, or purchasing accounts or access. It can also include supply chain compromise. That's where you compromise an upstream vendor, aka Target, with Fazio Mechanical, an HVAC vendor that took care of Target's air like refrigeration systems. You'd be like, why would Target let a vendor do this? Well, think of how many refrigerator goods are in a Target. Like, if all those frozen pizzas go bad one night, somebody's losing a lot of money and a general manager is probably getting fired. So it's important, but Target's mistake is they did not air gap it, right? So they had a vendor in their network. The network that processed credit cards was on the same, reachable from the same network that this vendor used to maintain the refrigerators. So that's an example of supply chain compromise via vendor network. Also, there's squatting of of various different dependencies in programs. There's compromising a frequently used product in a data center, such as we saw with SolarWinds and Kaseya. There's a lot of different ways where a supply chain can be compromised to introduce malware. There's replication via removable media to reach air-gapped systems. This is notorious for Stuxnet. We're not going to go into it for time, but Google it. There's insider threat, trusted relationship, an overlap area sometimes of vendors and third parties. And then there's hardware compromise, hardware additions, right? This is rare, more niche, but it can happen. Somebody's going through a tour of your facility and they have a mouse with some, weaponized auto-run malware, some cool exploits they've put together. They swap a mouse, and then when they get back, they have C2 to that host. I've seen this very, very rarely in the real world, but it's at least theoretical. And if you're like a defense contractor or a $1 trillion organization, it really might happen to you. So a few common scenarios, right? User clicks a link. Again, we talked through. It's often either phishing or malware in the end. User opens an attachment. It could be an attachment with a link, could be malware, but at the end of the day, they're either compromising an account or they're running malicious code. And we have different playbooks for each. We already talked about malvertising, aka there's a bad advertisement in a legit website, or maybe the website's compromised. User clicks a link and approves access to a malicious app. This one is worth talking about for a moment. So OAuth phishing, and shout out to my friend Matt Clark has talked and researched about this a lot, along with many other researchers. It's where you create a malicious app that looks legit. You put it in an app store, and then you generate a link to the user to install that app and or to grant that app that access. So we've all seen it. You click and you're like, this app needs access to your contacts, your browser, your files, your whatever, right? And everybody's just in the habit of clicking approve. Well, this can be weaponized, and the malicious app can be in an app ecosystem or cloud, and now you just granted that attacker-controlled app access to everything. So there's also, attacks on not user. You can attack a website. You can attack a service running on that website or a flaw in the operating system or software, or you can authenticate to an exposed account, like buy credentials, brute force password guessing. That's where you just guess a lot of common credentials. We already talked about default credentials. But people, do not make your password the season, the year, and an exclamation point, right? Like everybody thinks like, oh, there's like, Have I Been Pwned, an amazing project by Troy Hunt that, has chronicled like all the known compromised password hashes and like great service. If you haven't been there, visit Have I Been Pwned, or you probably have services that you use that might use Troy Hunt's project in the back end. But basically, in pen testing, it's not like a list of hundreds of millions of passwords being guessed. It's a list of 100 really common things, and then maybe 100, maybe even 1,000 custom things made in like an hour in an Excel spreadsheet with like flash fill, and that's what you're password guessing, right? So, people aren't usually cracking like the really like, hey, it's been part of a breach, but it's really, really long and relatively decent. They're like, in most pen tests at least, what's being cracked are really, really weak, bad passwords. So don't pick bad passwords. Social engineering. All right, so I know we've got limited time. I'll pause here for a second. If you want to know more about social engineering, just simply scan the QR code. Pause for effect. I needed another drink of tea anyway. So you can let me know in the comments on YouTube or your favorite social media or the Discord how many of you fell for the Rickroll. In person, every cohort of TSU, it gets to be less and less. It was legendary. Cohort 2, the first time I did this, I got like 3/4 of the class to fall for it. But then I felt bad and didn't deliver it as well. But now I don't feel bad because you're like in the privacy of your own living room when you get Rickrolled. So hopefully some people fell for it. But basically it's convincing a user to take an action like I just did, right? Like it's an MFA push or bypass. Hey, we're just going to get the user to get, oh, fine, I'm tired of these MFA prompts. Swipe up, leave me alone. The app's broken. What's wrong with these security people, right? There's gain access to a secure facility under a pretext. There's pick up the phone, like we illustrated that earlier. There's a lot to this, right? Definitely read Kevin Mitnick's books on this. Like read Ghost in the Wire. Like he wrote a bunch of books about how he pioneered this field. Also, if you really want to go deep here, I put out a video on YouTube on my channel just a week or two ago about social engineering, disinfo, and cognitive sciences and how they fit together. So if you want to know more about this, go watch that video. But this is enough to pass the TSU exam. Whoops, I hit the arrow too many times. So I think think my slides are in the wrong order. Oh, no, this is social engineering applied to complex scenarios. So supply chain, we already talked Stuxnet. Not going to go into that here. But go watch. I think there's a movie out now. There's a ton on Wikipedia. You can find blog posts. But basically, there's hybrid scenarios where there may be phishing combined with social engineering. There may be hardware or software supply chain, but then other things to help it along the way, right? Like basically, MITRE ATT&CK is a set of building blocks, and creative adversaries can assemble those building blocks in unique ways. And creative, effective defenders need to remember that. Execution. This is the moment where it all happens. This is when an attacker gets their code to run on the target system. Sometimes things will flow from initial access to execution really seamlessly, maybe even into other stages, right? Like maybe Recon finds you a flaw in a website that lets you drop a web shell, and maybe you've pre-staged a beacon payload, or maybe there's like a upload and run file vulnerability where you like can drop your own file and run. Well, you run a beacon payload that may have some additional stages that you've got scripted to run really quickly. So while MITRE ATT&CK is sequential, be aware that sometimes 6 or 7 things can happen very quickly in sequence. So, but this is where the attacker gets code to run on their system. Scripting is super common. PowerShell, CMD, command prompt, Visual Basic scripting, Python, JS, etc. JavaScript, Node.js was part of a really, really great project all over social media right now, where somebody was able to bypass Windows Defender application control via Node.js, run through Electron apps like Microsoft Teams or that type of thing. So scripting's huge. And then we're going to talk about live off the land later, but it's a really essential principle. And scripting-based execution often goes hand in hand with live off the land. User execution is very common, like the user clicks, opens, runs the file. WMI, abusive system services, serverless execution, weaponized containers, the list goes on and on. Persistence. As an attacker, you go through all this work to get your code to run. You don't want to lose it at the first reboot, right? Like, oh man, I spent a week getting access in that host, and then all of a sudden I lost it because somebody just did a routine reboot. So attackers want persistence. They want a way to have staying power. They worked hard. They don't want to lose it. So this is where they want their foothold to come back whenever they have the inclination. So they can create or manipulate an account. Like we have some scripts in Bypass It. Colston contributed scripts to Bypass It, which we also ported to ATT&CK that were really good with persistence, with scheduled tasks, jobs, and creating an account and giving it admin permissions. But in cloud, there's a whole lot of like, hey, this account can modify this permission of this other account to grant another account we control the permission to do what we want to do. And if that sounds confusing, it's because it can be. But in cloud, manipulating accounts with each other can be a compromised path. Scripts are programs that run at boot or login. Browser extensions can be huge. Browser extensions can also be very evasive because often like the host antivirus may not catch on to what's going on. Like a browser is sort of like a container or a sandbox. So if there's a bad browser extension within that, it can do a lot of bad things, maybe without the defenders seeing it as well as they would if it were like regular malware on the host. Modify authentication processes or flows. Implant cloud containers with malicious code or functionality. Privilege escalation. Usually the capabilities an adversary or pen tester or researcher get at the outset, at the first moment, aren't the capabilities they need to do everything they want. Anybody like this video? High Hopes, great song, fun YouTube video, but this dude's walking through town singing and he just starts walking up the building. Great video, but also that's privilege escalation. And I'm not that good at privilege escalation personally. I often have to like borrow other people's exploits for this when I'm doing research. So for me, it really is high hopes for PE or privilege escalation. One day maybe I'll get better at it. But the initial account compromised, usually sometimes there's some sort of flaw that allows the attacker to do something under the context of a more powerful account. Or related to this is UAC bypass. Like, ever get that prompt that says, hey, are you sure you want to? And then there's a yes, no. Like, wait a minute, I was just opening an email. I don't want to modify my system. A smart user may click no. Well, a UAC bypass, they may be running as local admin. Now they don't get that pop-up, so it's able to do things. Special thanks to Matt Handy, who actually wrote a UAC bypass for Bypass It that we then ported to ATT&CK. So sometimes a single step will escalate privileges and make an attacker persistent and set them up to move laterally because they stacked the dominoes, right? They've got a script that does multiple things. Examples of some privilege escalation attacks, this is like level 60 in one of my favorite game scenes. It's a really bad screenshot, but it has emotional significance to me. So comment if you recognize it. But Specific CVEs for the OS, right? There's a vulnerability, common vulnerability exchange for the operating system that allows a flaw that allows privilege escalation. We talked about UAC bypass, elevating execution with a user prompt. This is where social engineering is huge. Either the story you told in the email that delivered the malware, or a phone call following what you're doing. Yeah, this is Mike from support. Yeah. Just click OK. Yeah, click yes. So that's normal. Boom, that's a UAC bypass via phone call. Token impersonation or theft, parent ID spoofing or injection, escape to host. You might be like, Mike, will a pen tester or attacker really know which user to compromise? Like, hey, you're trying to get a PE. You sent malware to a bunch of hosts. How do you know who to call or their phone number? Well, remember, before you need that UAC bypass privilege escalation, you could do a lot of host recon in the user space, so you probably have a lot of data on them to build that social engineering. So while social engineering is not always super common within like cybercrime, again, scattered spider, the MGM and Caesars hacks, social engineering to get around MFA, it definitely happens. It's still not the most common thing. We have to remember that it is not just possible, but practical. Token impersonation or theft, parent process ID spoofing or injection. Our friend Jim does a lot of cool stuff in like injection spoofing, that kind of thing, as well as Cameron. Escape to host, that's my passion. I can't reveal anything yet, but we've got some big things coming. Ezra, Cameron, Jim, and I have all collaborated on some fun escape to host stuff, and we've got some fun things going on there. So, defense evasion. So, most of us in TSU and ACTRA are blue teamers, or even if we're red teamers, we're like mostly blue teamers that got into red teaming. So like almost all of us defend things for a living. So we buy all these expensive tools and do all these fancy things to try to stop our hosts from being compromised. So defense evasion has been a huge passion area for Cameron, Ezra, Christian, Jim, Cyrus, myself, several of us on the team, right? Basically rooms full of people are trying to defend, but there's other rooms full of people, virtual rooms or physical rooms, trying to actually be able to evade and get around our tools. So definitely check out the talks that we've done on Bypass It and Auto Pawn Key. Check out EDR evasion as a topic. We've put out a lot of other material. A lot of other great people have too. Matt Handy put out a great framework on his GitHub on how to test, specific scenarios in your environment about types of malicious communication to see if they work or fail. But basically, if you're a defender, tinker with red teaming things in your safe virtualized environment all the time, because it's going to be surprising to you what things you can cook up that evade your defenses. And then the cool part is once you find it, like being able to not have auto pawn key or bypass it work in your environment is pretty easy once you test for it, once you understand it. It's that way with a lot of things. Security comes across as difficult and complicated, but really it's a bunch of very simple things put together well. So a few examples of defense evasion include exploitation for defense evasion and disable tools, right? Like sometimes there's an exploit. There's GPO modification. There's removal of indicators or cleanup, or some call it anti-forensicating. These aren't in a good order. I need to redo this slide one day. Masquerading, making malicious things look okay. Use of local accounts, default accounts, service accounts, or other powerful native capability. This includes the entire live off the land topic. make the bad thing you're doing look like normal administrative activities. Spencer, or Tech Spence on Twitter, has done a phenomenal job talking about this topic lately. And he talks about, a lot of different tactics to be used. Definitely follow him. I'm not going to go longer than I already have by duplicating his work. Just go follow him and check it out. He's got a good podcast too. Pass the hash could be lateral movement, but also getting around certain defensive controls. And like EDR evasion is a deep topic that we're not going to replicate here, but we have a lot out there. So if you're curious, go check it out. It won't be on the test though. Overall flow, discovery, credential access, and lateral movement, right? So discovery is like internal recon. That's like, okay, I've landed somewhere. I did recon from the outside. Now I'm on the inside. I have to do recon all over again. And then, hey, I see some things. How do I get into them? Well, credential access. Let's try to get all the credentials we can. And then, move laterally and then discover again. Maybe you have a network interface in a new zone you didn't have before in the new host. Maybe the cookie jar you're trying to get your hand in is on that network, right? So you just keep iterating in testing. And that's what adversaries really do. I don't know if you can see that really well, but that is a prison door shut with like a string or a zip tie or something. So sometimes the defenses aren't as good as they appear. Credential access. Usually the credentials an attack is running on, the user that's compromised, the host that's compromised, the account that's running the software application or website that's compromised, is lower level user space. Hopefully, if it's set up properly, does not automatically have admin capabilities, and certainly doesn't have powerful admin capabilities like global admin, domain admin, access to patch management solutions, that kind of thing. So you don't want to have to, an adversary or a tester does not want to have to re-exploit each system they need to control individually. That's noisy, that's tedious, high odds of getting stopped. So pretty quickly, they want the ability to generate a ticket, a token, or just have a password that they can use to just legitimately sign in to all the things they want to get into, up to the stage that they either find the data they're trying to steal or have the reach to deploy the ransomware or whatever it is the things are that they want to do. So credential access is hijacking the ability to effectively use user accounts that don't belong to the attacker via a variety of methods. On a more practical level, it comes down to enumerating and discovering accounts, followed by compromising the accounts that are needed for your attack path. It can flow in the opposite direction as well. Like frequently it does, right? Like compromise something and then see what you happen to have. There's a great tool by a phenomenal researcher, Benjamin Depley, called Mimikatz, which evolved to PowerCatch, which evolved into many, many different projects known as Gentle Kiwi. And then there have been numerous permutations that are probably the preeminent credential access tool ever created. Cameron created a great credential access tool within Bypass It, ported to AutoPwnKey, that actually will pull browser creds. So like your Chrome credential store, like, hey, all my passwords are in the browser. That might be okay if it's like your Facebook or something. But if it's something really important like a global admin, or you probably don't want it there, right? Because we did our own POC and it's not all it's cracked up to be. So a few key techniques: there's adversary in the middle, brute force, OS credential dumping. That's what Mimikatz does. Obtain credentials from password stores, cracking hashes. Like often what you'll get is a hash, and then you have to crack that hash. If the password's strong, if it's what's called salted, meaning there's random data in there, and the original password was really strong, and the hashing algorithm is not broken, it's practically impossible usually to crack the hash. But if their password is password, it's not salted, and then especially if it's a weak algorithm, it might take minutes. So the difference between the good end and the bad end of password and hashing practices might be the difference between getting a password, clear text password in 5 minutes and, it taking till like the end of time. So input capture in ATT&CK, we built in a keylogger. Granted, it's clunky and the UI is not very good and we need to debug it, but it does capture keys, and at the moment it does it without getting detected by pretty much anything. So input capture is a very, very valid method. Shout out to Mark from our own GCU and TSU community for his input on that project. Session hijacking is really, really huge. Locating unsecured credentials. Spencer, aka TechSpence, was talking about this over Twitter this week. Like every time, and again, we have a module for this too in those frameworks, every time an attacker or a pen tester is going to look for password.txt, password.csv, password.xlsx, right? Like you would be amazed how often these things occur, or the file's named something clever, but in that file, there's a pattern of PSWD or password is or password equals or secret is. Again, in ATT&CK and bypass it, we have a simple script that will find those, right? But that's not even a really good script. Real adversaries and robust, like mature pen testers have like tremendously mature tools to find your passwords stored in the clear and to use them. So discovery. Again, we talked about it a moment ago. This is basically recon again, but from the inside. What accounts are available? What domain trusts? Like, hey, we're in this domain, but is this domain called not important trusted by super, super secret, this other domain? It could be. What are the GPOs? What's allowed? What's not? Do we have a cred that can let us modify the GPOs to do what we want to do if we're getting blocked from something important? Discovery of networks and traffic, discovery of systems and installed software and what's possibly vulnerable with it. Lateral movement. So this is basically where an attacker moves from host to host, right? This usually happens via common protocols that are used for network communication or remote administration. So WinRMM, remote PowerShell, RDP, SSH. If you don't know, these are the things that were on the last slide. Google or ChatGPT them. I won't explain everything in the interest of time, but basically, I'm visualizing the meme of like Harry, Hermione, and Ron and McGonagall there, like, why is it always you three? A group of us created a list, and sadly, I don't think I have a slide for it. But if you really look at it, lateral movement tends to happen within the same 10 or 20 protocols every time. Server message block, SMB, remote procedure call, RPC. What this means is there's 65,536 ports a computer can accept connections on. But of those, typically, there's vulnerable things likely to only be listening on maybe 20 or 30 things, and the most common exploits are consolidated there. 65,536 may be an intimidating number, but we can deal with 30. What this means is that microsegmentation, segmentation, host hardening, these things, like, you can go a long way by doing the basics right, preventing lateral movement. Like, hey, what needs these high-risk protocols? Well, this jump host over there, this patching server, this monitoring tool. Okay, not everything. My dog's looking at me weird as I talk forever and wave my teacup around flamboyantly. So exploitation of remote services or APIs are huge. Internal spear phishing or social engineering using important users or accounts as a starting point. Pass the hash or pass the ticket impersonation, generating a ticket using a certificate, and a certificate authority is huge, right? Because then even if they change the password, they may not invalidate the ticket. Authenticate using sniffed or compromised credentials. and then you could just circle back to the execution phase, but on a new host. It could be that you have an unauthenticated remote code execution flaw that just exists everywhere. You use it over and over again, and Bob's your uncle. I really do have an uncle named Bob too. Collection. This isn't that phone call that you keep ignoring when you're late on bill day. This is the process of collecting data and staging it later for exfiltration. We referenced the Target hack. The adversary that stole all those millions of credit cards and identities lived on the Target network, siphoning, with malware on credit card processing machines. They siphoned credit cards off and stored them for months. That's why they got so many millions. If they would have caught it and stopped it quickly, there would have been much smaller incident than it was, but it became huge. Well, one of the indicators might have been like, hey, why do we have all these terabytes of strange data that we didn't expect? And, oh, by the way, the data is credit cards. Now, to be clear, they may have encrypted it or hidden it, and that might have been pretty hard to detect. But at least the idea is good to think about. So we already talked about, in discovery, collecting the data from the host compromised, the data from what file shares it has access to, the data from exploited applications, data from information repositories, extract data from cloud storage. We talked about adversary in the middle, input capture, business email compromise. This leads to a common one, like thread hijacking is a really common one that kind of goes here of like, they don't do internal phishing. They dump the inbox. They look for important email threads. They spin up a new look-alike email address. It's not the real email address. They're not spoofing or impersonating. They just set up one that kind of looks like the real one, but if you look close, it's clearly not, because it's like, looks like the start of the right thing, but then it's at gmail.com or at proton.me at the end or something. And then they impersonate the thread, but put the malware, the phishing link, or what they're trolling for on the thread. And because you're already emailing with Bob, you think you're okay. I'm a huge fan of the Yogi Bear movie. So again, this is a multi-week module we're cramming into one review. So in this case, for the session that was this week, you have a lot of Yogi Bear analogies. And you can see there, he's arming a picnic table to collect a picnic basket, which is the tie-in. Command and control. Malware is rarely self-contained. Almost always, there's a malware payload, usually these days with good detection tools in most enterprise environments. You want a lightweight beacon, something that's sneaky, and you want to understand something as an attacker. Ask your software, ask your malware questions, give it instructions. You got to manage an attack the same way you have to manage a big project. So to do that, you need communication. That's C2 or command and control. It's how adversaries give instructions to, receive data from, and control the action of the host they've compromised. Often this is made to look covert, like it can be tunneled over encrypted protocols. It can use like HTTPS or like website protocols. It could even use things like going to benign websites with comments sections and looking for a certain comment to tell it what to do next. It often uses botnets and like distributed uses of compromised systems. And often it's sneaky, right? Like DNS or DNS tunneling is really common. Non-standard ports, or better yet, really standard ports to disguise communication. So by the time you're getting to trying to detect the C2 communication, it might be a losing battle. Oh, and remote access software. Biniam, Ezra, and I are kicking off some fun research using remote access software and covert delivery methods for it called Auto RMM. If you're interested in participating, contributing, or just using it to test, check it out on my GitHub page at Crude Solutions. And I think I had a QR code for that maybe on the first slide, or maybe my Twitter, which has it. Exfiltration. Notice as we get further and further on down MITRE ATT&CK, it's harder and harder to stop an adversary that has momentum. But this is where they're like running away with that picnic basket, right? Removing the data from an environment, ideally from the attacker perspective without detections. This often involves like staging it, packing it up, transferring the data. Like there are really sneaky ways that adversaries can get data out. And I've heard of things as exotic as like steganography. That's where you like hide data in a photograph in the pixels or the metadata of like a picture. But usually it's simpler than that. Most companies have bad governance of cloud storage. So once an adversary makes it to this stage, it's like, oh, let's just upload all the data to Google Drive or Box or Dropbox or something and take it, or OneDrive, and take it out that way. Techniques to conceal the data may include breaking it into chunks, encrypting it, transmitting it over expected protocols. So again, wait, why didn't you notice 20 terabytes going out? Well, there's lots of data going out all the time over port 443, to the world's largest cloud providers. Like, how are we going to spot that? There are ways. The most important thing, I think, for both C2 and data exfil, like there's data loss prevention products that detect like data egress. That's helpful for accidental disclosure, especially. There's all sorts of threat intelligence whack-a-mole to detect known C2, block it, block countries that your computers don't need to communicate with. But if you just don't allow arbitrary connections out to the internet over arbitrary ports, like if you follow a strict firewalling procedure, via like host firewalls or data center firewalls where you like micro segment, basically if you make it so that, hey, if I need my malware to communicate over 5074 to my host in Amazon, if it can't communicate, I'm not even going to know if my payload worked or not. I'm just like, what happened here? I guess it's not vulnerable, and I move on. Really, my exploit worked, but I have no idea because you blocked the communication. Impact. So in the Yogi Bear movie, they create this beautiful contraption called the Basket Nabber 2000 or something like that. And here it is on the slide. It looks pretty sketch in terms of flying devices go. Probably made by Boeing, I'm just going to guess. Sorry, bad year for that joke. But basically they take off and they're using it not to steal picnic baskets, but for good. And they take off and, they like break the rudder off. And Yogi goes back to Boo Boo and is like, hey, did you check the safety manual? And Boo Boo says back to Yogi, all it shows is a picture of us screaming. And then they scream and plummet. So if you get to the impact phase, get ready for a rough ride, right? And the impact could be the confidentiality of the data, leaking it out, the integrity of the data, leaving it there, not ruining it, but manipulating it in a way so that it leads to an attacker desired outcome. Like, what if they don't touch anything but simply adding zeros to a bank account balance? Well, extra zeros in the right place could make a big difference. Availability. This is where ransomware, denial of service hit, taking it down. Actually, ransomware actors technically do all three of those now with like double, triple extortion, but we'll pass over that. So they could encrypt the data. They could destroy or wipe the data. They could deny use of important accounts or resources, lock you out. Like there's the old famous like evil administrator, with a time bomb. There's data manipulation, defacement, denial of service. Like lots of bad things can happen. What happens next post-impact? You need three things. You have to have an incident response plan. You have to have a disaster recovery plan. And you have to have a business continuity plan. We just kicked off a community project. We had like 24 different security leaders on a call called CISO in a Box. It's also on my GitHub. Bunch of people contributing to it. Hopefully by not too long from now, we'll have like templates and instructions on how to create all these types of plans, along with a lot of other things out in the CISO in a Box project. So with that, we will transition to CIS 18 and defensive controls. And I'll try to move it on a little faster because I know this is going long. So what is CIS 18? Those of us who are old know it as the SANS 20, and it started as like the list of critical security controls. They were reorganized, consolidated, spun off into their own thing, and became the CIS 18. They're really, really useful as a high-level checklist. If you want to go super deep and detailed, you might want other frameworks, right? Like NIST standards or ISO standards, or there's a lot of things that get really, really detailed, or even CIS security baselines. There's a lot of things you can use. But a mentor of mine back in the day used to say, like, stay as high level in your planning for as long as you can. That's good advice, so we're going to follow it here. And CIS 18 is a great high-level overview. So here are the controls at a glance. I'm not going to read these to you. You can pause and look at them, but we're going to go through them. I've never liked the way they're organized. I think these are kind of organized like in a prioritized order. I think that's useful. But for teaching, I like to organize them in like how they fit together. Notice that the first two and most foundational are asset management of different types, like knowing what you have. How can you protect what you don't even know you have? And lots of breaches happen that way, lots of problems. So control 1, inventory and control of enterprise assets, tracking and managing your workstations, your servers, your mobile devices, and all other connected devices like Internet of Things, SCADA, cloud. You know all of the assets you have. Inventory control of software assets. Well, you're like, wait, isn't that the same thing? Well, no, these are all the computers and systems, but what software do you have installed on each system? And what software do you have facing the internet? And when a new flaw comes out, like a couple weeks ago, everybody was like panicked about a Tomcat flaw that allowed unauthenticated remote code execution. Well, that's really, really bad. So immediately you want to be able to know, all right, do I have that version of Tomcat running that's flawed? Where is it? Is it internet facing? Is it not internet facing? Is it in a high trust or low trust zone? What does it connect to? You can only do this if you've done CIS Control 1 and 2. This also works really closely with application software security. And then Control 4, I think, is all about finding and protecting assets, which is configuration of enterprise assets and software. So like 1 and 2 are what do you have, and then 4 is do you have it set up right? Again, I encourage you to look at these deeper, but we're going to go fast because this video is going long. Protecting data. Control 3, data discovery, data loss prevention, user entity behavior analytics. This Control 3 of data protection is served best with the side of identity and access management, right? So like knowing where your data is, both when it's sitting somewhere, when it flows, is it encrypted when and where it's supposed to be encrypted? How do user accounts behave as they interact with your data? What's normal? What's not normal? For example, there's great products and tools that say, hey, Sally usually only interacts with 50 files a day on the file share. All of a sudden, Sally is changing 1,000 files a second or 1,000 files a minute. What is Sally up to? Well, maybe Sally is ransomware. Data recovery, backup and recovery strategies. The main thing here, there's a whole art and science of immutability and tape backups and vaulting and one-way diodes, and there's all these different strategies for backups. So if you're not an expert here, get the advice of an expert. Ransomware actors love to take out the backups before they deploy the ransomware because they know if you can't recover very well, you're more likely to pay. Identity and access management. IAM is literally like its own career field. It is a tremendous discipline and a really, really great specialization. So it's controls 5 and 6 for account management, managing accounts, and access control management. Like, hey, what accounts do we have? Do we set them up at the right times? Do we get rid of them when people leave the company or when they're not needed anymore? And then what do those accounts have access to? That's the access control management piece. Elements of IAM, provisioning and deprovisioning accounts, authentication, authorization, and then it involves directory services and other identity services at the core of it. Active Directory, wow, you can tell I made this slide eons ago. Entra, formerly known as Azure Active Directory for cloud. There's federation services. You got to understand multi-factor. And then conditional access, zero trust. We talked about UBA. That's how UEBA is pronounced. And no, PAM is not a movie character. PAM is privileged access management. So vulnerability management and GRC I put together because really I didn't see a bucket for GRC, I don't think, and it needs to be there, but governance and risk management often also work closely with these disciplines. Continuous vulnerability management, scanning networks, pulling data from agents running on hosts, detecting things going across the wire to figure out what vulnerabilities you have. And then some of these tools also do what's called host discovery and asset management, feeding in to Control 1. Application and software security, continuous integration, continuous development pipelines, static code analysis, like you've got terms like DAST and stuff like that, dynamic and static application security testing, pen testing. This is like, obviously, there's outside assessments, but there's purple teaming, there's inside continuous assessment. I also think this includes testing your defenses. A lot of folks are like, oh, we're going to do a pen test, whitelist everything. Well, sometimes, or allow list everything is the newer, better term. Well, sometimes that's great, depending on what you're testing. If you're trying to find your web app security flaws, you don't want them to just fight with the firewall all week. But you also, at some point, want to test if the firewall actually works. You're paying a lot of money for it. Does the antivirus work? Well, test it out. Service provider management. This is the closest to traditional GRC, but manage vendor risks, open source intelligence, questionnaires, secure integration, etc. Email and web, like this could be its own topic, and maybe it should be. Our friend Cameron Jones does a phenomenal job with this and is a really, really great expert in this. But, protecting, email gateways, protecting things in web browsers so that when a user does click, you've got things like browser isolation, you've got stuff like URL filtering, you've got stuff like DNS security, like looking at DNS queries for bad ones. You've got the enterprise browser and remote browser isolation space. Like, hey, let's keep casual web browsing separate from important things. There's automation of response. So like across all these tools, there's automation, but email is a great automation use case. Like, hey, we found out 5 minutes after this was delivered by an adversary at 3 a.m. that it's bad. Don't leave it there. Pull it back, right? And then abuse mailbox management is huge. Have mature ways for your users to report bad things to you. Security awareness and training, can't say enough about this. There should be courses, there should be awareness updates. Like we send email broadcasts every couple of weeks. You should have like prominent web pages on your intranet and support portals that give security info. There should be contests, employee engagement prizes, phishing simulations, continuous testing. There's a lot you can do here. Network defenses. Control 12, network infrastructure management, and Control 13, network monitoring and defense. So this is like edge firewalls, like you got to have firewalls at the edge. Network segmentation and inspection. Micro-segmentation is where it's like running at the host or the hypervisor level. There's like, hey, if bad things are in SSL or TLS or encrypted traffic, are we seeing it? Layer 7 protection is looking at the actual traffic Like, hey, seeing payloads in a session, seeing somebody trying to exploit something, looking for signatures, using firewall intrusion prevention systems, on the bottom side, NDR and IDS, things like Suricata signatures, whereas layer 3 is saying, hey, we don't want this host to receive these connections over that port and protocol. Layer 3 is more certain in that, like, it's more bulletproof, but layer 7 is likely to detect a lot of things that maybe you allow at layer 3. So again, research the OSI model if none of that makes sense. CIS Control 13, network monitoring and defense. Well, the issue is you cannot segment perfectly ever. You have to let systems communicate. So the whole idea of network detection and response, or intrusion detection, is like dump all the traffic across all the things within network zones, across network zones, like massive amounts of traffic just into a sensor that puts rules across all of it. And sometimes you can even, like, there's some AI plays, some other stuff, but just classical rules for known bad do a lot. And then applying threat intelligence feeds to that data, very closely related to log management and incident response, which we'll get to. Responding to threats. Incident response management, cyber threat intelligence, sort of feeds in what the bad actors are doing. And by that, I don't mean B-rate films. Security operations centers deal with, like, triaging, like, hey, and often a SOC includes IR, but I like to think of it as a separate process. Like, hey, what things are happening? What do we need to escalate? How do we stop the small problems? Incident response is, all right, the SOC has determined it's a big problem. All hands on deck, everybody on board. This is where you've got 20 or 30 people on a Zoom or Teams call or whatever working the issue. Forensics. This is where, hey, you've pretty much passed the IR phase, or maybe other people are working the IR phase, and you want to analyze, like, okay, we know this host was compromised, but what did they do? What data was on that host? Is there any data that requires a breach notification or reporting? Do we need to coordinate with legal? And then, of course, there's this entire law enforcement dimension of, like, cyber forensics for, like, crime. That's a whole other discipline we can get into some other time. Tools and technologies, SIM, security information and event management. That's like where all your logs go. SOAR, like an eagle. No, SOAR, security orchestration, automation, and response, is just taking your log data and applying intelligence to it. EDR, endpoint detection and response. It's applying intelligence and logic to what's happening on each system and trying to look for bad things. The way I like to think of logs, going into Control 8, log management goes back to the Middle Ages or older. Anybody who's been in the military or who's seen a military movie, you have that guard that makes you check ID when you get into the military base, and then they literally write down, or maybe now it's a computer, I don't know, I served a long time ago, but they write down, petty officer so-and-so came at this time, sergeant so-and-so left at this time. That's a log. They used to be paper, heck, they might have been on, like, sheepskins or something, or stone tablets back in the day, but logs are old. But computers generate logs, like, so-and-so signed into this application crashed because of this error code, and that computers are generating many, many logs all the time. So if you have these logs in your security program, you're in better shape. If you don't have them, you're in really bad shape. Like, you don't know what happened. You're blind. You can do some stuff, but it's kind of ugly. But if you have logs, and then you have intelligence, and then you have automation on top of that intelligence, you can have a very, very powerful intelligent, triage, response, and mature process. Malware defenses. I always laugh at this because I'm like, wait, isn't that like everything we've been talking about like this whole time? But really what they mean is like antivirus, EDR, endpoint detection and response. application and script control, host firewall, host URL filtering or DNS, lots more, host hardening. But basically, they're talking about what do you need to do on each specific system to protect it from malware. All right, so that was a rapid fire walkthrough of CIS-18. Use ChatGPT, Claude, or your favorite AI to unpack any acronyms you didn't understand. Threat modeling, I like to really simplify this. It's all about figuring out who the attacker is and what they want, profiling the adversary, like how they work, what their methods are, mapping their tactics to your controls, and then mapping attack flows through to see where your controls would stop them versus where the attacks would succeed, and then even what types of alerts it would generate if they succeed. Like, we can't stop this attack at this stage. We're not mature enough, or the tool got rejected, or so-and-so told us we can't do that hardening step, but we can get a log of it happening, alert it, and find out right away. So those are TTPs, or tools, tactics, and practices, or procedures. So risk management then is all about taking adversary knowledge, layering in the intelligence of your control posture, and then adding the context of your response capability to make informed decisions, to drive wise investments, to sustain improvement. If somebody thinks risk management is like having a massive team of people who are crunching fancy spreadsheets to generate reports nobody reads, okay, if you work at $1 trillion bank, maybe. But for regular orgs with tactical, practical security teams, the security side of risk management is all about driving decisions, investments, and improvement. There's 3 fundamental ways to manage risk. You can reduce and mitigate the risk, like change things, make it go away. You can accept and track, like, hey, we gotta, everybody takes some risks. Like, we can't just go hide in a bunker, although some days I'd like to. We have to run a business, so that's never risk-free. There are always trade-offs, and business leaders are always having to sign off, like, all right, I know this is risky, but you rated it a medium, and you said if we do these things to mitigate it a little bit, we can get it down to a medium low. I'm saying do it. And then we note that they said do it. And if anything goes sideways, we share that ownership. And then transfer is where you get a third party or an insurance provider like cyber insurance. Maybe you have a third party that processes all your credit cards because you don't want to deal with that. You can transfer risk, but the responsibility in the end does somewhat always rest with you as the security leader, team person, the executive management of a company. So you can't all the way transfer risk, but you can transfer some of it. An enterprise view of risk, we have to remember risk management in a company is about more than just us on the security team. There's business risk, there's technology risk beyond just security, including security, and there's financial risk, which may even include things like lawsuits. We have to remember in the age of AI, we have to remember the greatest business risk is irrelevancy. A company that fails to adapt but does not have any cyber problems is inferior to a company that mitigates their risk, has some cyber challenges over the years, but does not go out of business because of irrelevancy. Of course, the best company, better than both of these, has excellence in cyber, excellence in managing all 3 types of risk. But it is important, if you ever talk to executives and you walk in like security risk is the only risk in the universe, you're probably going to be laughed out of there and you won't be an executive for very long. Lulls. You're like, what do you mean? You've been telling stupid jokes all the way through this presentation. And some may get the very subtle rap reference I'm going to drop here. Nobody stays for the credits, but you're almost there. You almost made it to the credits. Pretty soon you'll get that Marvel after the credits scene. But no, this isn't extra jokes and stand-up. This is live off the land. I'm not going to go deep on live off the land here, but just be aware that it's all about using the tools and techniques available in an environment to be able to move more stealthily. And, for example, here we have the smash and grab. Down here, maybe this person doesn't have badge access to this secret meeting. Maybe they're a spy that socially engineered their way in there. Or maybe they're all legit and there's a malicious payload running on this host, recording their conversations, capturing the screen, intercepting all the files. So I have to say, our community used to theorize about this, but in the past 2 years, maybe the past 4 years, starting with Cyrus's JoJo malware testing framework, on through some of our newer frameworks, we've been testing combining of defense evasion with live off the land delivery and lateral movement methods, and it is wicked. There is a lot out there. So we've already talked SOC and IR with CIS-18, but just remember these things flow together. They're not necessarily an island, so I like to think of it like the bridge over incident waters. The flow usually starts with a SOC, involves escalation and incident response, and then sometimes forensic services, come into the picture if an incident, attack, or an issue is severe enough to warrant it. So with that, thank you for making it through. I hope this review is useful. Hopefully it was useful both to people who are studying for the TSU exam or people who maybe couldn't make it to TSU and just wanted to learn. I hope you all have a wonderful night. Well, it might not be night when you're watching this, but it's late evening for me, so I hope you're well. Thanks.